right. Hello, data devs. Next up, we have Joe and Kyle. Joe and Kyle, are you there? There they are.
We are here.
All right, gentlemen. I will let you take it from here. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Kevin. Joe, I cannot hear you.
Technical difficulties with Joe. Nope, still can't hear you, Joe.
It wouldn't be DataDev Day without some technical issues, so
absolutely.
Should have had a joke ready. Should have had a joke ready.
I moved you guys.
Joe's probably
Yep. I have a terrible joke, Kyle. There we can go. I got you. Oh, there you go. Joe, you back?
Hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
I still want to hear the joke later, Kevin.
Where do bees come from? Singapore.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Things are only going to go up from here with that. All right, hello, data devs. Sorry about the technical difficulty there. I am super excited to be back again for another Data Dev Day, and I want to thank you so much for your participation. And I can't wait to share with you all details of the VizQL Data Service. This new feature is kind of my baby. It's the thing that I've been working on. But before I get ahead of myself, let me do a quick round of introductions. So my name is Joe Churlov. I'm a product manager here at Tableau. I've been with the company for about 5 years, and I've worn a number of different hats during that time. My more recent assignment now is helping evolve the state of Tableau's data modeling capabilities. I work alongside with Thomas, who presented earlier. You heard all about data modeling there. And my specific focus is this API that we'll be discussing today. Now, the real hero of today's session is my co-presenter, Kyle. Kyle, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. Hi, everybody. And thanks again for joining DataDev Day, October 2024. I am Kyle Massey. I am a 3-time DataDev ambassador for Tableau and a VP lead software engineer at a big bank. Yeah, Tableau and the APIs are really my life. It's what I work with pretty much every day. And especially VDS, which we're going to get into, really caught my attention the very first time it was demoed back, like, I want to say TC23. There were rumblings of this new API, and I was like, that's really cool. So Joe's going to walk us through some of the some of the foundationals, and then we'll dive in and kind of show you how you can start thinking about what you can do here.
That's right. And you just spoke to my next slide. So I'm going to set up value prop for you guys to explain why this API is awesome. And Kyle's really going to bring it home for us by showing us some awesome examples of VDS in action. So let's get to it. All right, the VizQL Data Service. It is a key step for us in turning Tableau's data layer into more of a data platform. And with this change, our product is heading into a new category, often referred to as headless BI. Now, if you aren't familiar with that term, headless BI, it's not just a scary word that we made up because this week is Halloween. I don't know about you. My daughter really loves Harry Potter, so every time I hear the word headless BI, I can't help but think of nearly headless Nick. Anyways, it's actually an industry term that refers to the ability to access the data layer independent of the viz layer for a BI product. So for example, today, almost all a user's interactions with Tableau are through vizzes and metrics that Tableau renders for you, even when they're embedded. So VDS is going to change that. Basically, what this means is that VDS is about opening up our platform so that you can make use of your Tableau data any way that you want. Now, that may sound intuitive enough on the surface, but I want to dissect that a bit with you because there's a ton of power there that may not be obvious at first glance. Now, to tell that story, I need to start with one of my favorite features, the published data source. If you aren't already a big user of published data sources, Hopefully this session will change your thinking about them. Or if you aren't super familiar with them at all, hang on while I cover some of the key aspects. Now, published data sources are central to Tableau's data modeling strategy, and you heard a lot of that from Thomas's session earlier this morning. I think they have a bit of a misleading name, if you ask me. That's because they aren't the raw underlying data source like what you would have in Snowflake or SQL or what have you. They're actually a layer of abstraction above that. It is the place that houses all the data modeling actions that a data steward or a data analyst take to build out a data model. So that's going to encompass all of the things pretty much that you can do in Tableau today, right? From connecting to one or more various types of data sources, relating them, building calcs on top, creating hierarchies, groups, so on and so forth. All of that gets captured into the published data source so that when someone else wants to consume it, that consumer doesn't have to go recreate all those data modeling steps. They just need to focus on putting pills on shelves to get the analysis they need. Now, you may have heard at some point in the past that the secret sauce of Tableau is something called VizQL. VizQL, what is VizQL? Unfortunately, we don't have time in this session for an in-depth answer to that. But what I'm talking about here is one hugely powerful aspect of it. It's that ability to take the pills that you've dragged out and turn that into the exact SQL query that you need, accounting for all the data modeling decisions that were baked into that published data source. Now, imagining opening up that power so that any workload could take advantage of it. More on that in a moment. Another great benefit of published data sources is they allow multiple workbooks, each asking and answering a different question to be built off the same PDS without having to recreate those models for each new workbook analysis. So you're going to get benefits like reusability, shareability, control, governance. More recently now, Pulse is another feature that interacts with the published data source layer. And it's a great example of how PDSs are evolving to be the common data layer for Tableau. Pulse is a whole new feature. It has nothing to do with workbooks and the traditional way of building vizzes. Instead, it connects directly to published data sources and is powered by the underlying modeling semantics that analysts and stewards curate there. All right, so we've established that published data sources are awesome and they're great, but there's one major limitation today, and it's that it only works within the confines of Tableau. Workbooks can leverage it, awesome. Pulse can leverage it, even better. And that's clearly very powerful. And by the way, after all, you can embed Tableau vizzes and metrics in custom apps. So there's a lot of flexibility there too, but that's largely where it ends today. Well, what if you could push that boundary out a bit? What if you could take all your curated models with their dialed in relationships and complex calculations that you've invested a lot of time in perfecting and reuse them in other contexts? So like I was saying a minute ago, you don't have to go figure out how to write equivalent SQL that Tableau is already generating for you over here. Well, this, my friends, is where the VizQL Data Service comes in. The VizQL Data Service enables programmatic access to the data in your published data source. And it lets you build apps that leverage the cleaned up semantics you've already built into your PDS. And it lets you query for data in a more simplified way. And it lets Tableau handle the nitty-gritty of figuring out the right SQL query to generate, which also means that it helps ensure that the data that surfaces in your custom applications will be consistent with the same data that shows up in your existing dashboards and reports. With VDS, you can reuse your investments in Tableau models to power any number of scenarios. For example, the output from VDS can be used directly in custom applications. Basically, any application that needs to retrieve data from a backend database is potentially a scenario for VDS. Tableau data models can be plumbed into existing business processes and line of business apps. Imagine For example, integrating Tableau into a point of sale application. And by the way, you wouldn't want the numbers in your point of sale app to be different than the numbers that finance stares at in their Tableau dashboards. With VDS, it'd be much easier to ensure that consistency since the data access is going through the same layer. VDS can also play a big role in embedding. You can use it alongside our existing embedding toolkit to further enhance the types of experiences you can deliver. And I think you're going to see some of that magic later with Kyle here in a minute. Hey, data scientists can also leverage these refined models as inputs into their machine learning and statistical work. With a bit of coding, you can generate data frames for data science solutions and ensure that any machine learning work is leveraging the already cleaned up models that exist in your PDS, resulting in better output from your data science endeavors. And last, but certainly not least, these data models can also be part of custom generative AI solutions, allowing customers to roll their own solution to building agentic AI experiences. AI agents all the rage these days, right? And really, there's probably so much more here. I think I am just scratching the surface, and I'm guessing you will find uses for this that we haven't even thought of yet. VDS truly allows you to model your data once and use it everywhere. All right, so to quickly summarize before I hand it off to Kyle. First, VDS is going to open up the number of ways in which you can integrate Tableau into your business. It's going to allow you to go more wall to wall with Tableau. Second, VDS could potentially simplify your life because it's leveraging the semantics that you've already built, and it's handling all the heavy lifting for you when it comes to generating SQL queries. Third, the more you have workloads going through VDS, the closer you'll get to a single source of truth experience. We think that you'll love the idea of getting consistent answers across your BI and application endpoints. And last, but certainly not least, there's a lot of AI focus right now with agents and techniques like RAG. VDS is a huge unblock towards making such solutions possible with Tableau. You just heard a bunch of that in the previous session with Stefan, where he talked about headless BI. This is the API he was referring to. All right, enough talk from me. I think you guys would love to see some live action demos, so I'm going to hand it over to my buddy Kyle. Take it away, Kyle.
Thank you so much, Joe. This is great. So I will advance one slide here. We already did some introductions at the beginning, but I wanted to pull up this slide to call out my DataDev Quest crew, most of whom are on the call. And I am also a co-lead of the Data Pride Tug. So if you have anybody interested in a user group for the LGBTQIA+ community, we are the tug for you. So to dive right into some demos here. So if you guys were reading between the lines as Joe was talking, what VDS is really allowing us to do is to take the data that we already have, as Joey, we've already curated, we've already done all of our transformation, and we've published that data out on Tableau server, and that's what we want people to build workbooks off of, right? But what if we want that data, we want to leverage that data to create different experiences? You know, Tableau is great, embedding Tableau is great, but there are other times, to use Joe's example, like maybe we want to use this data in a couple different places, and we want to make sure that it always flows back to the same source, so that, like he said, we wouldn't want our finance people looking at data that one person created and then our POS system have some totally different reporting. That's that can get a little messy. So let's dive right in. I'm going to share my screen here and actually show you first how you can get started using VDS. I think I'm okay to say this. It is available on all cloud pods at this time. So it is still in a developer preview. There are things that are going to change. That's why we always have our lovely forward-looking statements. But it is something you can dive in and start playing around with today. Can I get a confirmation that someone can see my screen?
Confirmed.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so what you see on the screen in front of you now is actually Postman. I'm sure many people on the call here are familiar. If you're not, Postman is a really nice way of developing API calls without having to write the code and then run the code. It's more of you can see kind of a browser experience here. And Joe and team Joe and the VDS team have actually put together a great Postman, both a library and an environment, and I'll talk about what that means in a second, which is available via the VizQL Data Service documentation, which will include the link on a later slide and also in the chat when we send out the wrap-ups. But just to dive right in here, so within Postman, I'm having an issue with my screen. Give me just a second. It's DataDev day. We always have this. Okay. So now back to Postman. My screen share went off, didn't it? Yeah, let me start that again. Apologies, everyone. Here we go. Should be back here in just a moment. Okay, so within Postman, like I said, the VDS team included both a collection, which has just some sort of pre-formed requests that we can take a look at and reuse. They also included, which makes this really easy to get started, is an environment inside of Postman. So if I pop this open here, you can see that I just have variables that I could plug in. So instead of having to remember to change my base path and all that sort of thing, I can just plug in what I need here, which really the most important things for you to know for this demo are my server, my site ID. I am using a PAT here, and so since those are sensitive, they're hidden by Postman. I'm using a PAT and a PAT secret. You can also use a connected app client ID and secret, or a JWT, whichever flavor you prefer. But on the left here inside of Postman, you can see that I have, this is really just the beginning of a query. And anytime you see this double curly bracket, this is just replacing those values for me. So within my query here, I have a list of columns. This is all in JSON. So if I want to start getting some data from this published data source, which in this instance is our good old friend Superstore. So just by putting in a column name, right, I can hit send, and I get a response. I get my regions. That's exactly what I would expect, right? So that's not super exciting. Let's start doing a little bit more. Let's say now I want sales. So if I bring in column name sales, and in this case, since sales is a measure, I want to tell it what to do with it. And in this case, let's just aggregate by sum. So we do function sum. Clean that up a little bit. Now that I do that, you will see now I get a set of, by region, the sum of sales. Now we know as Tableau people, right? This is giving me answers at the level of granularity that I asked for. So if I throw in another column, for example, if I throw in column for state, which is lower in the hierarchy than region, once I do this, my aggregation will change. So Tableau takes care, or VDS specifically, takes care of kind of what we would see as we drag pills, our blue and green pills onto the shelf, how we would see our level of granularity change. That happens automatically. Now, of course, that means you sort of have to understand your data to make sure that you're getting the results that you want. But you can see how quickly I threw together a query here, and now my application just has this data. I can just do what I want from it, like it would be from any other API. But it's got my built-in security. It's got my row level security if applicable. I can create a custom calculation in here as well. So if even calculations that don't exist in the data source. So if I want to say, for example, let's say is Ohio, we'll just say I'm here in Columbus, Ohio. Let's just see. So then in this case, since this is what I'm creating, I can just say calculation. And my calculation here, same syntax you would use in Tableau Desktop, would just be if state equals Ohio, then true, else false, end. And if I send this query now, and I'm going to have an issue because I have my quotation mark is not in the right space. It does give you information here about how I messed this up. So if I send this again, now my results will have a Boolean in them that will say, is this Ohio? None of these are Ohio, as you can see in my example here. We can also do filtering within these queries too. And this one's a little bit longer, so I'm just going to copy this in. But inside of our filter, or sorry, excuse me, inside of our query object, you can also add an array or a list of filters, which somewhere in here I've gotten this is off. Let me try that again. Let's go here. All right. So now that I've got my filters in the right place, And I am, if we look at the filter, what I'm doing here is I'm filtering by state. This is a top N filter. So I've said how many would be 10, and then the field to measure here. So sales, the sum of sales, and the direction descending essentially from the top. So if I hit this, now you can see I only have 10 results. And Ohio's in here, so now I've got is Ohio equals true. So you can kind of prove out that the calculations and the queries are doing what I would expect them to. So this is a great way to dive in, start playing with BDS. Like we said, the documentation link will be included. But let's take this a little further and let's start imagining what we could do with some of this data, with having access to some of this data that we already have, and just doing whatever we want with it, right? So let's start with an example that I hope not everybody in the audience is going to groan about this, but we all know we are always going to have those users that say, I just want the Excel. I just want a CSV. I just need this. I just need that. So this is a really good, use case for BDS because we are already controlling who the user, if we hook in with our identity provider, we already know who the user is. That's who we authenticate as. We can make sure they only get data that they should have and any row level security that might be relevant. It's the nature of the beast, right? We're always going to have those people that kind of want to do their own. They may not want to do the web authoring thing. They may not want to go and download something that's tied to a view. We just want to give them the raw data, right? So this is an example of a report builder type application that you could build using just BDS. So I've got tiles here for each one. I've got orders, customers, and regions. Let's just generate the first one here. So this is just sending a pretty generic line level, row level report for orders from our Superstore data. So there's a lot of rows here. You can see once this pops up, I've got 10,192 rows. I've got just a little bit, just got a preview of the data in here. And if I'm happy with that, I can hit this download button. And now I have this data as a CSV, and that should pop up in a moment now. There we go. That's the data. Yeah, I know. That's the data that was in my query. So let's look at that query, right? That can't be too complicated since it's a pretty simple query, and you would be correct. So if I look at the query that I sent for, excuse me, that's the wrong code. If I look at this order query, I'm not aggregating anything in this query. So if you look at this request body, I am just naming the columns that I want. And if you want to give someone a line-by-line ability to export data in this fashion, this is all you need. And then this would get returned. This gets returned to your application's front end, and you can do what you want with it. You can make an entire experience, which I'll look at in a second, using just a single query to BDS. Let's look at something a little bit more complicated, since we want to build up as we go. So if I jump back over here, so next thing on my list, customers. Maybe I'm a sales rep or a marketing person, and I want to know some information about my customers. Let's go ahead and generate this query. So first off, what I can see here in my preview, 4,944 rows, and this data preview contains a column here called order count. Maybe I want to do some sort of marketing campaign where I want to target repeat customers. I want to target people where their order count is more than one. So I can build that into my UI with this little switch that I have right here. Now, if I regenerate this report, then I will now see that this is only customers that have placed more than one order with us. And obviously, these are all very made up scenarios. You could think of any business use case you might have. But if we look at the differences between this query and the last one that I sent, you see our setup is the same, but I've got a little bit more going on here, right? I've got a calculation down here based on the count of the order ID, which I am also sorting against. And I've got some other columns here. I'm summing up sales by the customer, profit by the customer. I can specify the number of decimal places. All of these kind of formatting things that you would do in Tableau Desktop, you can do here, or you can let your front end do it. Whichever works better for you. That's kind of the theme. The key here is your data, your way. You already have it. Do what you want with it, right? So if we look down at the bottom here, in the request that I made for filters, I am filtering on order count. And I want it to be quantitative, so I have the amount, and the filter type is minimum. So in my request body, I have a Boolean for repeat customer. So when my front end sent that request, I had true false based on my switch that was in the UI. And so if that was true, I wanted to return the minimum of 2 orders, otherwise minimum of 1. Just give me everybody. So that's another example of what we can start, the kind of experience we can start to put together using VDS. And then the last example on this screen is a regions query. So maybe I am a regional manager or a division manager. I'm in charge of 1 or more regions, and I want data about that. Let's say for this example, maybe I only care about data in the West. And this query is going to fail on me, I believe. Sorry about that. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next example. I think I know what's going on here. I might be able to fix it in a moment. But you can see where I can show you the query, at least to show you the filtering that's going on based on the request body. I believe I forgot to update some data in here. But if we look down on the filtering here, again, I'm filtering by column named region. I'm filtering on a set this time around. I can choose include or exclude. And then my front end just sent an array of region names. So that's another way to sort of create a custom UI experience. Very simple changes here. You can see the same thing. I'm kind of doing some calculations. I can give columns an alias if I want them to display better, all sorts of things. So let's jump into one that's a little bit more, I would say, intense, a little bit less give me the Excel. So let's imagine, we're going to put on our imagination caps here. We work for a support desk team, and our data comes from maybe our support system and is published into Tableau server as a published data source via Tableau Prep or some other ETL tool. Well, now that I have that, wouldn't it be nice if I could just create my own bespoke experience based on this data? So what you're seeing here, I'm just going to refresh. So what you're seeing here is a mock portal that I put together, but I made one single query to VDS that is powering every single data point that you see on this page. From the ticket number to the title to when it was open to who is it waiting for, who was it opened by, etc. I need to refresh my screen 1 second. Sorry. My screen is going to stop. I will turn it right back on. This on 24 does not like my screen share for some reason. I apologize. Let me get this going again. Screen 1. Okay. So now that we've got this pulled back up, just to reiterate, every point that you see on this screen is one query to VDS. So I can create an experience here where I myself want to see, okay, what kind of alerts do I have for my tickets today? I can come up here. Oh, okay. Well, I'm being alerted that I have 25 past due items and 6 escalated items. I probably want to hone in on those and get started. Let's start with escalations, because if I don't, then Zach's going to yell at me. You know how it is. So from here, I've created a UI where I can just go in and drill down on any one of these tickets by expanding here. I've got the reporter, Mr. Bruce Wayne. Batman's opening tickets. I can see when it was open. I can see any comments that were left. And this is where the power really takes off, where Joe was talking about before. I can integrate this into another application. So I can use this send to user button or close ticket button to make another API call that either goes and changes the status within our own internal system, which will float back down if we have an ETL pipeline set up. I could use things like the REST API and the Hyper API to update this data in place on Tableau server. You really, if you could imagine anything that a front end or anything that a web application could do using any sort of data, this is really where your imagination can start to take off. But let's look at some other things that you might be interesting to try to accomplish with VDS. So I've seen my tickets here. I've got these points based on what's past due and what waiting. Every once in a while, sometimes we just want to visualize something on a web page easily. You know, maybe it doesn't warrant a Tableau dashboard, or maybe it's something that experience doesn't align with the rest of the UI UX. And for quick hits like this, what you're seeing here, this is just a generic JavaScript charting library that I've taken the VDS response and fed it into. And now I can see these web native components inside of here that help me visualize lightweight visualization without any additional effort. We should probably, so seeing this here, I mean, something's going on with this guy. Everything he has is escalated. So we probably want to talk to Zach about what he's doing or not doing. But yeah, that's just another example of how this is all data that came from Tableau, but I don't have to use it with Tableau if it doesn't fit my experience. And then lastly, the last example that I'll show here, going to what Joe was speaking about, maybe there is a scenario where I want both. I want to embed the more traditional Tableau experience so that my users can, explore what's going on here. I can quickly find here, okay, these ones circled in red were escalated. I can see if this weren't totally random data, this scatter plot would be a little bit more interesting. But I could see, okay, based on customer, what's the relationship between my satisfaction score and how long a ticket was open, and things like that. All of these insights, both driven by Tableau and my own insights and the own code and UI, UX that we've put together, all in one place with one query to VDS. So I do have a couple more minutes left. So I'm going to actually jump over to a third example just to kind of continue the what if scenarios that we're seeing here. So the next example that I have, let's imagine we work for a library. And we want to create a customer portal that is connected to all of our library data, and our data happens to be in Tableau. So now you can see I've created a view here that shows me all of the books in our library. I've got, again, with one query, I can make all of these data points for the genre, the title, the year. I've pulled in URLs for the book covers. I've got these spark lines here, which these are not Tableau. These are just web component spark lines that show me how popular these books have been over the last 6 months. And as I go through here, I can also use just sort of web sorting here. So let's say I want to sort by genre, put those in order. Okay, Huck Finn, that sounds good. I haven't read that since high school. And then let's just pick some. We'll pick Lord of the Rings. I haven't read that all the way through. So now you can see here that just like a true web store experience, I've got a little cart building here, and I can click on that and review my order. And if I want to reserve these books, I can send that to an API, create an order, and then my users can go find a librarian and pick it up. So again, these have all been sort of scenarios to kind of get you thinking outside of the business world, even though obviously that's how most of us use Tableau. But when you start to think about like, man, if I just had data, what would I do with it? VDS really is, I believe, your answer. And I've been a really huge fan of this ever since it was first announced, ever since the first demo was done. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to come and show these to you today. I have a few minutes left, so I can stop sharing. And if there's any Q&A, Kevin, or if anybody's been watching, I'd be happy to answer those questions.
Yes, we do have a couple questions. I just want to point out that Zach said Batman doesn't open his own tickets, he solves his own problems.
That's true. That's true. You can thank ChatGPT for the result or the opener names there.
Joe, I think you answered a few of these questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to. Keep on top of it.
Kyle,
I'll just repeat one of the.
You were reverbing, Kyle.
Oh, I was? Apologies.
There we go. Okay.
I was just going to say one question worth mentioning, repeating. There was a question around whether this would be available on Tableau server or not, VizQL Data Service, and the answer is yes. When we release, it'll be both on cloud and on server.
Yeah, someone asked, is this similar to the Hyper API to query data, but you don't have to download the data source first?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, you can kind of think of it that way. There was also, back in the day, folks would embed something and then hide it just so that they could then do the query data endpoint from the embedding API. This removes that middleman as well. Like, this data is truly not tied to any view or dashboard. So if you don't have to create some cross tab for your users to download if that's what they want. You just build your query, VDS through VizQL, as Joe was explaining, turns that into your perfect SQL query, and then just gives you your results. It removes a lot of the hackiness that people attempted to try to accomplish some of the things. Excuse me, some of the same things.
You're muted, Evan.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Yeah. Technology is hard. Spicy question. What's licensing look like for this?
Yeah. So keep in mind, this isn't released yet, and we're still finalizing details. The current plan right now, the thinking is this is going to be available in all SKUs. So if you have standard Tableau, server on-prem, server or cloud, you'll have it. If you've got Plus Enterprise, of course, you'll have it there as well. That's the current plan of record.
Support for backwards compatibility with with versions in the future releases. So I'm assuming the backwards compatibility. Like, are we backporting? Maybe that's the question. Probably not.
It's either that, or the question is, hey, if I write a solution that leverages VDS, but the API evolves and it changes, will my solutions that I built on top of an older version of VDS still work? And that's a great question. I would expect us to and some support for versioning. We haven't crossed that bridge yet. We haven't even GA'd, but I think that seems like a reasonable thing for us to go do.
Yeah.
Chad asked a question. Could this be used for querying published data sources for PII to meet governmental compliance? That's actually one of the use cases that Joe and I kind of tossed back and forth, is like almost like data validation or things of that nature. You could create some sort of tasking through whatever application you want to make random sample queries to different published data sources and inspect that the values are what you expect them to be. You have a table of something we do internally. We have like a database of things that are usually suspected PII based on the column name. You could make a query and run through some of those options and see, is this data truly PII? You would kind of have to own the definition of what PII means to you at this case, but you could definitely use the VDS to do validation type experiments as well.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this, and I think it bridges one of the questions Lucas just popped in to ask about. Is this a competitor to the semantic layer tools? And someone asked a similar question earlier, and my perspective on this is that everyone in our data ecosystem every customer doesn't have one tool. I've never gone and talked to a customer, and at least most companies have 10 or more data tools. So really, what we're looking for is to kind of integrate with as many different systems as possible. And I think that should be the goal of everyone in the data space, is to integrate interoperably. You can choose your best of breed for whatever task you want to do, but we want to create ways that allow you to integrate with different tooling. And Zach, I've been thinking about this as it pertains to DBT as well. Like, I can imagine there's a DBT test. So once we get a full end lineage from source, model, Tableau, and DBT, VDS could write back into DBT test framework to actually validate what you were doing in that pipeline and that model. So Lucas, I hope I answered that question there. They're coming in here.
I saw a couple other questions that I was going to try to answer. So they just jumped away on me. Andrew, will there be a way to get the VDS query from a Tableau view so I can build what I want in desktop and then sort of reverse engineer the VDS query? Joe, that's probably a question for you. I'm not aware of any way to do that, but it is actually kind of an interesting question.
I love this question. It is something we've talked about. And so, yes, I'd love to put that on the roadmap for a post-GA thing. It is not currently slated to be part of our initial release, but we have talked about this.
Cool. Then there was one other question, just real quick, because I know we're right at time. But Carl, can this be used to access usage information previously available by querying the Postgres database? So not directly, but you can use VDS with the admin insights published data sources. So sort of. You can get anything that's in admin insights, you should be able to query with VDS. So beyond that, work with your bug people like Kevin to get more in those data sources.
And then last one, I'm going to have you guys, because we're at 11. Are there any connectors to Excel or Google Sheets, or is this going to be a REST endpoint? So this is a REST endpoint by itself. Kyle, can you mute? Thank you. This is going to be a REST endpoint by itself, but stay tuned for Explore and Tableau at 11:20 Pacific. We'll talk a little bit more about what you can do there. All right, so we'll answer a few more of those questions as they come in for those that we didn't have answer. Thank you, Kyle and Joe.